So Star Trek Picard was released recently and I had my review up, so if you have not seen that, please go check that out. And also please give a like to that video, subscribe to my channel, give a like to this video, and share with anyone you can to help my channel grow. I appreciate the support. And please, after listening to the entire video, put a comment at the bottom, share your thoughts, what you think, agree, disagree, counterpoints to my points. So let's begin. So Star Trek Picard episode 1, Remembrance, I enjoyed it generally speaking. The reason for my enjoyment is mostly seeing Patrick Stewart and his acting skills as Jean-Luc Picard, as well as seeing Data and seeing them together, the nostalgia factor, seeing the Enterprise. That was really enjoyable. However, as I watched and thought about certain things, and I've been seeing other people talk about Star Trek Picard and just what's been wrong with Star Trek in the modern era in general, I started to see holes, and I started to see a lot more problems than I previously noticed. So just to begin, this video is just speaking about those issues, and I hope these issues are resolved in the future, or I think it's just gonna continue the descent of Star Trek into where it's not going to be very profitable for CBS, and that's probably going to lead it to being sold or just stop making Trek. So, and none of us want that. I sure as heck don't want that either. So to begin, one of the key issues with Star Trek Picard that I noticed starting off is the fact that Jean-Luc Picard, his current position seems to be less of what Jean-Luc Picard would do and more so of what Patrick Stewart would do, because we know from reading that article that spoke about his thoughts on why he came back is to reflect our current world, to reflect Trump. We know that the Federation is basically supposed to be a stand-in for the Orange Man, the Bad Man, or Donald Trump, etc. Just like the Klingons were a stand-in for Donald Trump in Discovery, and that just raises the question: why are these people so obsessed with Donald Trump when there are greater evils in the world? Why are they so obsessed with copy and pasting the same idea from one series to another? It just makes me question the veracity, or rather the intelligence and capability of the writers and their ability to understand Star Trek. Star Trek always had political aspects, but for the most part it was allegorical. That's when it was its best, right? So talking about current day stuff in Star Trek, irresponsibly is not a good idea. It's going to lead to disaster, it's going to lead to preachiness, it's going to lead to uncritical preachiness, it's going to lead to a dumbing down, if you will. I mean, it's already happened, of Star Trek. It's going to lead to a lot of different violations. It's going to turn Star Trek into a generic sci-fi like any other. Star Trek is not supposed to be that. They're not growing their audience, which was their goal. So clearly what they're doing is not working. The same people that love Star Trek are watching these shows. And if you lose your core community, like with any type of franchise, any type of brand, anything you need that core community. Yeah, you'll get the casuals. You make with a instead of making 1 billion, you'll make 3 billion, with the casuals or something. But the point is, you always need that core community to have long-term sustainability. And I feel Star Trek is abandoning its core community. It's so worried about expanding itself, making itself into Star Wars, and Star Trek is not Star Wars, right? So I just feel that this is not a good strategy by CBS, and I think they need to refocus on rebuilding the trust of the community and not continue with this divisiveness that exists currently in our community, right? And then from there, by sticking to Star Trek, I think that instead of accepting that society's dumbed down, so they need fast action, this and that, I think Star Trek needs to fight to make our current society better, right? That's what Star Trek needs to do. So, and Star Trek doesn't need to be some huge franchise like Avengers or Star Wars, right? It can be somewhere in the middle, right? It can be somewhere in just a tad below that in terms of financial gain, which is okay. But this will give CBS All Access a consistent, loyal subscription base, which would give them consistent revenue, and that's what a smart company should do, or rather would do. Excuse me. So I kind of went off a long tangent there, but my thing is this whole idea of Trump and Picard and where he would be. I think he would more likely, if he left Starfleet, I think he would be off somewhere, on some archaeological dig, because we know how important being an archaeologist was to Picard, right? he was very close to leaving Starfleet, or if he would leave it for anything, it would be archaeology. We know how important it is. When we met his mentor, we knew that he almost considered leaving Starfleet in the episode Family, right after he was liberated from the Borg. And we know that he settled that he belongs in the stars. He doesn't belong here, right? So the fact that he's in the vineyard alone, destitute, it seems unreal to me, right? It just seems strange. Now, we got reasons as to why Picard is in this situation, right? And in isolation, they're acceptable, but when you look deeper, they're just problematic and idiotic. For example, right? Why would Starfleet blame Picard for like 1 minute they're ready to help, he got the ships made, then the Utopia Planitia shipyard is destroyed by androids, which, as far as we know now, and this is one of the things that need to be answered, right? It has no connection to Picard. The Synths attacked, okay, but what does that have to do with Picard? What did Picard do? Trying to save the Romulans and the Synths are two separate things. They're not related unless there's some connection that Starfleet or whoever or knew that Picard didn't, because clearly he's confused. So why are they two related? What does Data have to do with this, right? They've had Synths gone rogue before, in the original series with those sex slaves of Harry Mudd. So that's just one problem I see. Another thing that I notice is the fact that, they talk about the fact that Data, has never failed Picard, or he never lost his trust, but, we see throughout the series that when Data loses control, or he joins lore, or this or that, he takes over the ship, and that's those situations. Or when he's lying to Picard, he's losing his trust. Of course, his memory was wiped and reset by those aliens or whatever, but the point is, that's just inconsistent to me. In addition, Picard seems to, Picard's best friend in his closest relationship was Geordi, Data's relationship was closest to Geordi. He was never close to Picard in the same way, and we see throughout the series that there's a certain distance between them, or a certain matter of fact, like when Data died in that episode where he's kidnapped by that crazy guy, that toy collecting dude, Picard moves on right away to the next assignment with a second thought, right? Is it change now because of the more years of service? Is it change now because he gave his life for Picard? He's seen his development. I don't know. But it just seems weird that Geordi wouldn't have the same type of emotions for Data the way Picard does. It's just a little bit strange to me. And Geordi needs to be in this. If his centers around androids and Data, he worked on Data the most. He has the most knowledge, even more probably than Maddox. So I think that's another issue that I think that needs to be answered or resolved or addressed at some point within Picard. Another thing, why are they called synths? Why not androids? Androids is much more unique and much more Star Trek than synths. Synth just sounds like some generic, again, another generic thing, right? And what happened to Lal, or lore? They're saying that they can't replicate Data, but lore is basically identical Data, just batshit crazy. So why not get lore? I hope that these are addressed, because like I said, this is just the first episode, so I'm being nitpicky on purpose, right? Because I want Star Trek to be better. I want it to be I want it to be upward. I want it to be optimistic, and why, and my next problem is the fact that the Federation, why is it always portrayed as xenophobic or racist or imperfect? Our world was not perfect in the 90s. Hell no. Our world was not perfect in the 60s. Hell no. And yet, Star Trek was able to tell a utopian, optimistic future where humanity overcame those things. You see the fact that Uhura, when Abraham Lincoln in that episode of the original series came on, calls her a negress. And Uhura just looked at him with no reaction, right? Because she didn't even know what that meant. She didn't even know to be offended. But Abraham Lincoln told her that, that's a bad word, that's a bad thing, I apologize. And Uhura just laughed, and Kirk comes in and says, we're past those things. We don't even care about those things. Racism is not even a thought to them. So how do we regress to this, right? Were they not made in worse times than our current time? Racism, segregation, right? Lynching, right? Civil rights, lack of rights for many different people. Wasn't that worse than 2019, 2020, the 2000s, 2010s or whatever, Trump? Aren't those worse times? And yet they were able to build optimistic Star Trek, right? I think the optimistic Star Trek died with Gene Roddenberry, and we saw a slow descent into cynicism, and we see that in DS9. They didn't go full cynicism, right? It's still my favorite series because they always showed that hope. They showed that in the face of danger, you show vigilance. In that episode Paradise Lost, right, when the changelings invade Earth, even though it was crazy and it was explosion and Paradise was invaded, you know, at the end of the day, they showed that the way you keep Paradise is through constant vigilance. You persevere. You don't just give up and become cynical, right? And Cisco represented that optimistic, hopeful side of preserving Paradise, and his former CO represented the side of being defeated. You know, so it's I just don't like that. I think this is lazy. I think this is weak writing. I think it's an easy solution. The problems, the imperfections, they're supposed to be out there with the other worlds that are not there yet. They haven't made it. It's not supposed to be with humanity, right? If you wanted to do a Trump thing or current day thing, you do that with some other planet, with some new power that they encounter, right? That isn't there, that's facing off against the perfect federation. How would the perfect utopian federation, right? How would they react to our current world if they met our current world on another planet? That's how TNG operated. The meta conflict of TNG was their utopian world versus our imperfect world with our many issues. It was criticizing us and making us face those things. It was making us face those issues. You know, why aren't you there yet? Why is it so hard? And this meta conflict could easily be extended to the current day Trek, but that requires knowledge of Star Trek, knowledge of Gene's vision, right? And trust me, I disagree with Gene Roddenberry on so many things, on a fundamental level. You know, he's a humanist, atheist, secularist. I am not, right? But still, I can still agree on some things, right? And they need to have knowledge of Star Trek canon, basic things, especially with the core characters like Data and Jean-Luc. You can't make a mistake there. You have to have some core knowledge. So I just don't understand why these writers, these show creators, can't understand that and do that. Have the meta conflict of this racist orange man bad on some other planet or some other power, new power, right? Dominion 2.0, and have the Federation face off against it. You know, make a commentary on our time, make a criticism on our time, make it allegorical, make it intelligent, upward, as to how the Federation, humans, might respond to this Trump man bad on this alien world, right? And that could give us an example of how we can respond as humans today, as those people on that other planet, to the current issue we're facing. It's a meta type of analysis, a meta conflict. That's when Star Trek is at its best, the meta conflict. But this is like on the nose, lazy. These writers, they don't understand Star Trek. I think what happened was, you know, when Star Trek was written originally, geek culture, nerd culture wasn't that popular. You know, you had actual nerds and geeks and scientists writing it, so the science was accurate. All that stuff was much more, you know, polished and thought out. But now you have just because it's popular, it's the flow thing to do. You have just any other old writer calling themselves quote-unquote sci-fi writers and just writing these stories. Yeah, so there are many more issues. The whole Romulan sun exploding, not being able to detect it, not able to evacuate when needing the Federation's help, the fact that the Romulans are called enemies, you know, and the fact, again, the racist aspect of the interview, they're Romulan lives, and I'm like, dude, seriously, this is a Federation? And why the hell did they have TV? What the hell is this? Anyways, there's just many different issues that I hope they address. I don't think they will. I think the Star Trek we knew is dead under the current regime. I don't think it's coming back. And sadly, ironically, Star Trek is a reflection of our society, just like they wanted, but not a good one. Not a good one. And, you know, it's not a good one because normally it would be Star Trek, right? The meta conflict would be our current time versus the Federation's perfection. We would be some alien species on another planet versus the perfect Federation. And that would be the conflict. That would be how it would go about. But now we have our world apparently is shit because Donald Trump, and Star Trek's world is now shit because whatever, the allegorical, or rather the replacement for Trump, the Federation. So it's bad within bad. But Star Trek is not supposed to be bad within bad. It's supposed to be the hopeful, optimistic, utopian future, whether it's fake or not, it doesn't matter. Versus versus our current world. So it's positive, hopeful versus our cynical, bad world, or criticizing our world. That's the meta conflict. It's not supposed to be a direct conflict. It's not supposed to be a direct correlation, direct representation, or whatever. I'm just messing with words right now. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm just trying to explain myself. But anyways, those are just my current thoughts. We'll see how they progress with the current episodes. I hope to God that they're addressed, or at least some of them are. I don't think they will. But then again, hey, what do I know, right? I live under Trump, and we're cynical today. So there you go.